music, I would say culture currency, right? So what happens is we can't just think of music because when we say culture, football is still part of culture, right? The idea of inventing something, right? Why can't we invent our own version of a Tesla? That's part of the culture, right? Also, you have in the Caribbean now where you have amazing space programs, right? You have also, we need more money in those programs. You also have kids that are building robots, right? Robotic programs. So the way that I think that we move forward is invest in culture. And I think that culture is as a whole, right? And I think that one of the things I want us to look at is how much music is being streamed through these streaming platforms, how much film is being streamed through these platforms, how much pieces of content that you putting through these platforms. Now, I want you to ask yourself, how much of that do the Caribbean and Africa really own, right? So I want to see us create like our own Netflix, 10 versions of Netflix. We need our own Amazons, you know what I mean? To me, this is what's exciting. And guess what? You have kids between Africa and the Caribbean that actually have some of these platforms, but they're smaller now. So my thing is, how do we start to hub it in and start to invest in that and start to scale that and make that bigger? So me as a leader of technology in the 21st century, you know, that's one of my missions.
What we're doing through storytelling is humanizing us to expand the storytelling, saying that we're more than just drug addicts. Maybe we're just a mother. Maybe we can't get a date. Maybe it's a story about, I don't know, a woman who literally is trying to find herself after a divorce. Because what happens when you do that is when an audience comes in and witnesses that storytelling, they see themselves in what they see on the screen. That is considered excellent storytelling. But when you limit us in our humanity, and that's through trauma. See, all the movies that you mentioned are all white people were in the lead in most, so it wasn't our story. It just happened to be based in Africa, but it's not our story. I'm saying that we want to be the center of our narrative, who we are in all of who we are, which sometimes has a lot to do with being black and doesn't have a lot to do with being black. And so therefore our storytelling becomes expansive and it becomes ours, just ours alone. And that's all I would like to do. Just tell a simple story. That's it.
The Commonwealth of the Bahamas played host to the 31st Afreximbank annual meetings, which is holding for the first time in the Western Hemisphere. It was also the third AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum, and the clarion call was raised for Global Africa in response to the challenges of deglobalisation through the theme, Owning Our Destiny, Economic Prosperity on the platform of Global Africa. I'm Kenneth Igbomo, and I'll bring you the highlights from 3 days of intense conversations to unlock trade and economic opportunities between Africa and the Caribbean countries.
This week, we celebrate an important milestone in the journey that began just under 3 years ago. A journey that owes its origins to the catastrophic COVID-19 pandemic. History is replete with stories of transformational ideas, projects, and initiatives that were the byproducts of responses to major crises. The Afreximbank Caribbean outreach was no different. Today's event presents a unique opportunity to tell the story. At the height of the COVID-19 crisis in 2020, the world was turned into a jungle where only the fittest will survive. Procuring very basic face masks, test kits, and other COVID-19 containment items was a function of the size of your order and the depth of your pocket. Fragmented African economies, as well as small island Caribbean economies, stood little or no chance. For the first time, the African Union quickly realized the power of aggregating and pooling its over 1.4 billion people rather than engage in the market as individual countries. It then mandated Afreximbank, Africa CDC, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa to develop a pooled procurement mechanism for COVID-19 supplies. We developed and deployed the African Medical Supplies Platform, a digital platform used to pool Africa's demand and to deliver COVID-19 supplies across Africa. At the request of the CARICOM, they were added to the pool and availed of access to the highly discounted supplies negotiated by the African Union with the government of China. Afreximbank's payment and letters of credit services, underpinned by its $3 billion pandemic response facility, were also made available to participating CARICOM countries. A few months later, the struggle for access to life-saving COVID-19 vaccines began. It was such a chaotic market that manufacturers only spoke to those with certain minimum orders and proof of significant funds. The African Union used the same pooled procurement mechanism to procure up to 400 million doses of Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine in a $2 billion deal underwritten and funded by Afreximbank. CARICOM economies were again admitted into the arrangement and received the much-needed vaccine doses under the guarantee and financing of Afreximbank. It is notable that at a time of extreme nationalistic instincts and primitive self-preservation, it was Africa that was willing to share the little it had with the CARICOM. By being there for CARICOM countries in their greatest hour of need, African Union demonstrated unequivocally its commitment to its declaration of the African diaspora as its sixth region, and gave practical meaning to the concept of global Africa. And for Afreximbank, which participated actively in financing and delivering the support to the Caribbean, and which had a few years earlier deployed a diaspora strategy aimed at positioning it as the global Africa Bank, it was time to head west to the Caribbean. It was time to take the center stage in promoting, facilitating, and financing intra-African trade with the emphasis on the end to show that the bank will be ready to support all Africans wherever they may be. In 2021, we began that journey with a visit to our sister, Maya Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. And this week, Your Excellencies, we're all here in the Bahamas to attend the 31st annual meetings of the bank, the first ever to be held in the Western Hemisphere. With almost 4,000 people convened here, Afreximbank is firmly establishing the rules of African capital to centers of concentration of African people. The Global Africa Bank has emerged. And it emerges as we celebrate the greatest gathering of Africans in the Caribbean ever in history. Honorable Prime Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you can now understand why we are overwhelmed with joy as we welcome you and other esteemed guests and partners to the 31st annual meetings of Afreximbank and the 3rd annual AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum.
A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Those profound words by Marcus Garvey remind us that our journey towards economic prosperity is deeply connected to our understanding and appreciation of our shared heritage and the collective strength of global Africa. Today, under the theme, Owning Our Destiny, Economic Prosperity on the platform of global America, we gather to celebrate and chart a course towards a brighter future. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is my distinct honor to acknowledge the President of Afreximbank, Dr. Benedict Orama. Your visionary leadership and commitment to fostering economic integration and growth across Africa and the diaspora have been instrumental in driving the progress we celebrate here today. To all my colleagues, I stand on the protocol that has been acknowledged. And today, I'm reminded of the boundless possibilities. I'm reminded of the boundless possibilities that define the Caribbean and indeed the Bahamas. Our region is a collection of islands and a vibrant landscape of culture, innovation, and opportunity. The Bahamas, with its strategic location and dynamic economy, represents possibility and a gateway to a broader economic horizons. Growing up in Cat Island, one of our country's beautiful family of islands, I was always filled with big dreams of my country. I may not have envisioned the specific paths our economy would take, but I always believed in the limitless potential of our nation. Our history is one of invention, disruption, resilience, and innovation. We have pioneered in various fields, from tourism to financial services, transforming challenges into opportunities and showcasing our ability to innovate and lead. Just as the Bahamas has embraced its unique position to become a global leader in tourism and financial services, so too can we, as a collective African and Caribbean nations, develop our potential to shape our own economic destiny.
So how can the political leadership in both Africa and the Caribbean countries create the environment for global Africa to flourish?
I want to say that we're going to continue to work on getting all the other outstanding members of the region to be a member of the Afrexim family. And I say family because that is who we are. We are indeed family. You know, I ask myself a question, I ask all of us to silently ask ourselves the same question. We are in the Western Hemisphere. This meeting is taking place in the Western Hemisphere. This bank has done a remarkable job. How much of this positive story will be told on the headlines in the Western Hemisphere? How many in the Western Hemisphere would speak about the impact of the Afreximbank in Africa and everywhere else that is operating in? That is why these forums are important, and it is important that every stakeholder turn out to show our collective support for what we are doing to change things. Three years ago, we would not have seen a single sophisticated investor from Africa in this region. Fast forward to today, we have seen in this region, since Afreximbank came on board, more than 50 African delegations looking at business opportunities in this region. That alone tells you a story. We have seen the billionaires, the technology companies. We have seen an interest. We have seen a spark. And it is this little spark that can ignite a massive transformation and realization of the opportunity and potential that exists within our region.
This meeting to me, it looks like not just a bank's organized meeting, but it is a political dispensation where we are dealing with a very big issue as a global Africa. The concept of global Africa, I liked it very much and very much inspired in it. But I think there are two basic things which I just want to mention where global Africa has to do. The first thing is we have to understand our history. I think we are lacking in the understanding of our history, not only us here, but the entire population in global Africa do not understand our history. We do not understand that we can bring African Renaissance if we understand our history. The second issue which I just wanted to mention, there are many things we can discuss about history, but we have a history of slavery and a history of colonial administration and colonial political economy. But we have not clearly understood what the political economy of our colonial masters was. And practically when you see now in our continent, let me say global Africa, we do have a political economy that has continued without a big change from the colonial political economy. And if we don't change that rent-seeking political economy of our colonial masters, we copied and try to pursue with it, then I think we cannot bring that kind of change.
The more events such as this that our respective regions organize, the stronger we will become collectively. Economic cooperation and integration between the African and Caribbean regions are pivotal for leveraging collective strengths and overcoming individual limitations of economies. The Caribbean community, CARICOM, has long recognized the benefits of regional integration, which include building resilience, scaling economies, and enhancing global bargaining power. And despite challenges such as differing national interests and structural policies, there is a concerted effort to harmonize economic policies and improve intra-regional trade. The convergence of payment innovations and strategic partnerships, particularly in cross-border payments, can set the stage for a new era of trade and economic prosperity between Africa and the Caribbean. This intra-regional cooperation provides the opportunity to tap into global value chains and foster economic stability, which is essential for the development of both regions. The ongoing efforts to move beyond political dialogue, let's talk, to private sector investment and engagement reflects a commitment to overcome historical barriers and create a unified economic space that benefits all participating nations.
We have to get out of this, and nobody will help us. One of the first lessons I learned from my father is that what you can do for yourself, don't outsource it for somebody else to do it for you. Because it will not be good enough. We have outsourced our development to others to do for us. The time has come when that should stop. We have talked too much, and the time has come when it's no longer tautology, it is action. We have even talked of political will. I now talk of political action. Will without action is abortion. Now, we must have action.
Moving from talk to action will be a big step for the integration of Africa and the Caribbean countries, but getting it right will require many moving parts.
Global Africa means two things to me. First, we must establish Africa's industrial capacity, develop our capacity to invest in our own industrialization, to enable the continent of Africa to rely more on herself than global supply chains. So the establishment of alternative supply chains within the African continent without disconnecting from the global economy. That to me means that we would then be globally competitive as a continent and as a region where we position ourselves for investments in supply chains so that around the world, companies, corporations, when they are looking to establish supply chains, they can look at the continent as an alternative, reliable region for the establishment of these supply chains. That's global. That's positioning the continent for global competitiveness, which then takes me to the second point. It would then enable us to have a relationship with the Caribbean region, a relationship that will enable us to have exports on both sides, trade flows of value-added production, whether we are talking about agriculture or the processing of minerals, or indeed the establishment of manufacturing capacity. This is, in my view, these two are linked. Once you are able to have the supply chains established on the continent through regional value chains, then you are able to reach out and have a substantive trade arrangement, trade and investment arrangement with the Caribbean.
Yeah, because that's one of the key things that have been explored here at these meetings, what that framework would look like in terms of having a free trade agreement with the Caribbean and Africa. This conversation would not have been possible 20 years ago, but because of the work that has gone down in your secretariat over the years, at least in the past 5 years, we've seen some traction in that space. But in terms of what that framework could look like, I know that there are many moving parts to getting it right. Africa, we still have quite a long way to go, but we've made some progress. But what would that look like crossing between two regions?
I think that the priority would have to be identifying sectors of interest. For the Caribbean, most likely it will be the services sector, tourism services, maybe professional services, as well as fisheries products, value-added fisheries products for export to the African continent. For Africa, of course, for us, we have a diverse economic portfolio and a trade portfolio that's very, very diverse based on region. Export profiles are different on the continent. So we have a wider set of considerations in terms of sectors that we would have to make. But I think in general for the continent, it would be manufacturing, strengthening our manufacturing capacity for export, the financial services sector. As you would have heard recently, the announcement that Afreximbank is making available a facility for Caribbean countries to integrate their economies with the African continent. Third, it would be creating seamless payments systems between the two regions. Once we've identified those sectors of interest, we then would have to anchor them at law. So we would have to develop a legal instrument that would facilitate those trade flows between the two regions of the African continent, and this is something that our leaders have been discussing since actually the very first Africa-Caribbean summit that happened in November 2021, a virtual summit, of course, and so we've been building on that momentum. What is really gratifying is that we are now moving beyond just political rhetoric and declarations to talking in concrete terms about trade and financial and trade and investment deals that we can conclude.
Now, the African Export-Import Bank coming here is also very, very significant. Why? Because some of the shareholders of the African Export-Import Bank now are people, are governments from the Caribbean. And on the basis of that, in the future, the African Export-Import Bank is going to assist the member states of the Caribbean community to set up a CARICOM Export-Import Bank. So that's one dimension. Now, of course, it's a financing arm, and so it has a lot of resources for business people to leverage. So on that basis, there are some African business people like Dangote who are now coming to invest in the Caribbean. So all those are dimensions of growing interaction between the peoples of the Caribbean and the African region. And we'll also foresee a situation where business people from the Caribbean will start investing in Africa. And my message to them is that when you are investing in Africa, you are automatically reaching out to a market of 1.4 billion people.
Yeah, because also in the conversations at this the event so far has been that talk around the AfriCaribbean Free Trade Agreement or area, and what we need to take for that to come to reality.
Yeah. Well, it will take quite some time, but the foundations have already been made, like I indicated. They are indicators, levers of integration between the two regions. And in addition to that, we are supposed to sign the memorandum of understanding yesterday, but one of the signatories from here had a bereavement in the family, so it was not possible. We are going to sign it after the funeral. So when we have signed a memorandum of understanding, then we are going to mainstream that idea at the political level now, because then the CARICOM here in the Caribbean will bring the issue to the member states. Then at the African Union, it will be my task to bring the issue to the member states. And once we get the buy-in, then we're able to come up with a roadmap. Now, when we do that, one of the first dimensions is to ensure that we have an impact assessment of that collaboration. So that, because we know that we have existing trading arrangements with the various parts of the world, just like CARICOM also has trading arrangements with the various parts of the world. How is that going to impact on the proposed African Caribbean Free Trade Area Agreement? Then there's the issue of common external tariff. So we need to develop that and come up with a roadmap on how we're going to arrive. So it's quite a lot of work, but there's political commitment emerging.
I always tell people that, a free trade agreement starts out as a concept. A free trade agreement is not a magic bullet. It's not going to just immediately transform the world. I always tell people, look at the EU. Look at how it started. Started with 6, moved to 12. They launched the economic community. They then went from there to the European Union. And then now they're at 27. The point is that if we begin the process small with the willing and the able, I think the Guided Trade Initiative is following that concept. We then look at the Caribbean and we look at Africa and we look at the potential. There is a huge potential in the area of tourism and travel. In fact, tourism services are almost 80% of the opportunities. Then we look at minerals and metals. The biggest exchange of exports between Africa and the Caribbean are in ammonia, fertilizer, and petroleum products. So that's a natural fit. The other one is agro-processing and processed foods, because we share so much historically and otherwise in terms of taste, in terms of what we like, and the ability to build on the agro-processing elements. The third, and for me, very important area is the creative industries. Burna Boy and Buju Banton are the same. Just in different places, but and I think that the whole idea of building on the Pan-African Fashion Alliance that President Orama has launched through Afreximbank, and we'll be working with them on that. The idea of looking at music festivals, looking at the joint work that will actually enable us as the Caribbean and Africa to begin to glean the kind of benefits from the creative industries that we can see. And then also finally, looking at the issue of logistics and travel, because that is one of the biggest weaknesses. How do we fix that? And I think we can if we actually see the opportunity rather than the challenges.
Yeah, because there are many verticals for connectivity here, but then how we then harness this is a lot of that is hinging on the private sector. And also the big institutions like Afreximbank, the DFIs, and how they can help de-risk the environment for these businesses. Let me hear your thoughts on that as well, because if we are really going to move the needle, business has to see this as a viable option.
Well, I think the fact that business is here, the fact that they have come, and that they have come not once, not twice, this is the third time, that businesses have seen the opportunity and are willing to become part of this narrative tells you that it has legs. What we need to begin to do is to identify the specific barriers that need to be removed. So, for example, one of the biggest challenges is the tariff levels. The tariffs on goods too high compared to trade with other partners. So, for example, the tariff on rum from the Caribbean is 81%. Why? I mean, why? And that is, we need to bring the tariffs down. That's one. The second is to look at how do we ensure that the tariffs on primary goods are not like 4 times less than the tariffs on processed. Because the fact is then you are saying that value addition is going to be punished. How do you ensure that that is not an issue? Then we, of course, look at the issue of logistics and how do we ensure that the ability to trade is not compromised by the fact that the cost of trading is a problem. But I think that the fact that the private sector sees it, and the head of the Caribbean Private Sector Organization is here, many private sector companies are here, both from Africa and the Caribbean, tells you that they see the opportunity.
It's good to see the pieces of the global Africa puzzle falling into place, but a lot will hinge on the capacity of African and Caribbean institutions.
A very strong African Union, as Donald was saying just a moment ago. African institutions like the African Export-Import Bank playing a scale role for the continent, like the African Development Bank, I would say at least 10 times the scale that it is right now. I really mean it. I'm not being hyperbolic. The African Development Bank should be lending $50 to $100 billion a year. And there's no reason why it can't. Get the foreigners off the board of the bank. If they're saying, no, you can't do this, get them off the bank. You don't need them. You need partners that will scale up these institutions. Get the African voice from the African Union into the G21 deliberations. And of course, next year's G21 will be in South Africa, which is great. Tremendous opportunity. So make a very strong union institutionally, the quality of the commission, the quality of the leadership, the boldness of the vision, a 40-year high growth, high investment scenario, a trajectory, renegotiate how debt is evaluated because it's all wrong analytically. The IMF and the World Bank need big fixing, and it's possible with a strong voice and a strong analytical approach.
It's very good that in the global south, we begin to build those links, like we are doing now with the Caribbean, with the ASEAN region. We should reinforce what we are doing. So it will be a kind of globalization which is regionalized. Someone had called it a poly-globalization, because the globalization we have been used to is not working for us. And finally, to answer your question, is Africa risky to the extent which you say? You know, during the global financial crisis, I was still president of the ADB. And literally, I got calls from all these big international media. They had reached one conclusion, that Africa will be the continent most to suffer.
And it wasn't.
I had no evidence for that. I could not see objectively what was it, but they had reached the conclusion. So what I did with my colleague Ping, who was head of the AU, and my colleague from ECA, we called all the finance ministers and governors of the central bank to Tunis. This is what the world is saying. So let's check. Truth is, we suffered because of the decline in the global demand, but our financial system survived very robustly, better than Greece, better than Cyprus. There are some real risks, market risks, currency risks, political risks in Africa like somewhere else. We know how to manage those. We know how to manage those. But when it comes to perceived risk, what some people in this place call the zip code problem. The zip code, because we are on a zip code Africa, we pay a premium for this perceived risk. That's what it is. That said, we have a few things in some of our countries that are fixed, in terms of debt management, in terms of fiscal discipline, in terms of allowing markets to adjust. But that is a technocratic issue. The political issue is strengthen Africa's own institutions, increase cooperation in the global south, as we're doing now, and make sure that we build the buffers needed, because there will always be crashes. That's a long answer to a short question.
Yes, there is the political will to drive global Africa, and calls have been made for more action and less talk. But for the required traction to drive this agenda, a strong buy-in from the private sector is pivotal.
I mean, that's what I keep saying, that look, for us, I think we need to make sure we get together as, Africans. And then also I must thank President Orama of Afreximbank with his management in trying to bring Africa and the Caribbean to sort of work together, because that will be fantastic in terms of our growth.
Well, you're here, which means
Yeah, yes.
I'm wondering
because,
what conversations you're having and what you're thinking about this
we
AfriCaribbean.
produce quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it now, I don't know the exact price, but I know the price in the Caribbean in terms of petroleum product is very high. So we produce it cheap. We can always bring it here. We can set up a terminal, and we'll be able to feed their needs.
So what do you need to make that happen? In terms of tariffs, bilateral agreements, what do you need from a policy perspective?
We'll have a bilateral agreements with them, and also, bringing in stuff from there is not more than 18, 20 days maximum. And then we need to set up a terminal. Once we set up a terminal, they will have a very, very cheap oil. They will have a cheap energy. And by having cheap energy, their own economies will grow faster.
Sounds like you're really going to upset the oil mafia.
Well, it's not only about the oil. We now have a capacity of almost 52 million. By end of next year, we'll be at 62 million of cement capacity. And we are not only saying that we can import, we can bring in from Nigeria or from Africa. If they have limestone with energy here, we can also produce what can satisfy them. We've done that before in Africa, and we should be able to free them off from the shackles of other people.
Brilliant.
If we have the ingredients, the limestone, additives, and level of power, it's a 28 months maximum. So 28 months maximum, they can all be self-sufficient. They don't have anybody to hold their neck in terms of squeezing them, making them to pay an arm and a leg. 25% of our fertilizer that we produce goes to the US.
Yeah.
So instead, we'll take some to the US, and we can fully satisfy the needs of the Caribbean countries in terms of urea, and we're going to get into phosphate and potash. So definitely we want to have that kind of cooperation with them, so that, they will believe that, yes, President Orama taking them and bringing Africa with the Caribbean countries together, makes sense. and it's going to really make sense going forward. I mean, it's not going to be a free stop, but everybody will be happy. It will be a win-win between us and them.
Let's also hear from other private sector players.
I think there's several things we can do. My mantra, has always been, let's do something. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's start the journey. The first thing we've done following this whole Afro-Caribbean initiative is that we've launched a VC fund, a $50 million VC fund. The first close took place about 10 days ago. The initial investors are 2 Caribbean investors and 2 African investors. So the Afro-Caribbean initiative is already starting to happen, and we're looking for other initiatives to support. The other thing that I think we can begin to do is, for example, get 1 or 2 of the big African banks to open an office somewhere here, because trade and investment flows go through banks. They shouldn't be here to compete with the local banks, because that doesn't make any sense. But if they act as some kind of facilitator and some kind of mediation element for bringing flows into the Caribbean from Africa, and perhaps from the Caribbean into Africa. So there's a role to be played there. If you talk about transportation, I think we can look at companies such as Ethiopian Airlines or Kenyan Airways, and if all they have to do is have 1 flight a week to the Caribbean, it's actually shorter to fly to the Caribbean from Africa than it is to go to Europe and then connect to the US and then come down here. And possibly a lot cheaper as well. So I think there's certain steps we can begin to take to make global Africa a reality.
For societies, countries, entire regions or continents to grow, one condition has always featured, which is that they own and control their own capital. They own their financial capital, they own their intellectual capital, and they own their cultural capital. So the theme Global Africa really resounds with me in that respect, that as African companies and entrepreneurs establish their capital, and I'm not just talking in banking or industrialists, I'm even talking about in the media and entertainment, as they establish their financial, intellectual, and cultural capital, they have to do it in a global manner. That's the only way it can grow, and that is why I'm here, to see how by crossing the rails of trade and investment between Africa and the Caribbean, we can grow Access Bank, Access Holdings, global capital.
If you have a larger market space, you can facilitate better scale in terms of the size of the businesses and activities that are there. And one of the ways that you can boost the resilience of economies and businesses is just by giving them more outlets for their goods and services. And I think we begin to realize that once we can address the logistical and policy issues that matter for trade, particularly the logistics, but once you can address those, it's easier, or it should be easier, for trade between Africa, the continent, and the wider global Africa can be facilitated. In the case of the Caribbean, we know too that services are an increasingly important part of trade. Services for us, in many cases, tourism, financial services, and therefore, to the extent that some of the logistical matters are even further simplified, it is important then to look at how we can leverage the professional expertise and experiences that exist in various parts of this global community and use those to our collective benefit.
Well, I think the most important thing is to expand the market. So with the African Free Trade Zone agreement, we're ending up with a common market, and that common market is being linked with CARICOM. And the logic there is that there are so many opportunities for African businesses. Africa has created a lot of indigenous champions to be able to expand their operations into CARICOM and use the Caribbean market as a platform to get into the North American market as well as the South American markets. So I feel that it's an incredible opportunity shepherded by Afreximbank, who've done an excellent job in ensuring that the Afrexim Charter has now included all the member states who've all signed it and have become part of the Afrexim Charter.
Yeah, because I spoke to Commissioner Albert Muchanga. He talked about they're taking this conversation a bit forward, looking to sign an MOU with the CARICOM states to start the process for a free trade agreement between Africa and the CARICOM states. But then for that to be successful, there has to be a strong tie-in from the private sector. And I'd like to get your thoughts around that, the opportunity you see, especially in the line of business that you're in this new integration.
Well, I mean, let's face facts. Trade comes before diplomacy. The essence of diplomacy is to facilitate trade. And I think what we've seen here is an instance where an institution like Afrexim has done the reverse. They have led the path and done an incredible job in ensuring that they have made life easier for the indigenous business, the African champions, to come and do business in CARICOM. And so we've started looking at opportunities in Guyana, and opportunities in Suriname, opportunities in Trinidad, which are very exciting for us in the hydrocarbon space, which we do, as well as also eventually in the renewable space.
For some insight on the deals, Afreximbank's Executive Vice President at the Intra-Africa Trade Bank, Kanayo Awani, takes us through the pipeline and the history of the Global Africa Strategy.
This has always been part of our strategy for promoting intra-African trade. You know, in 2016, for instance, that's when we developed our intra-African trade strategy, where we defined intra-African trade as trade between and amongst African countries, but also trade between Africa and its citizens in the diaspora. See, as far back as that, we had conceived the strategy and we knew that we were headed to a global Africa. We pulled out from that strategy a diaspora strategy. And it's that strategy, you know, that we're implementing in a sense that we're trying to empower Africans wherever they may be, foster on the unity and the characteristics of our past, to see that because we believe that aside from having a shared history, we also have a shared future. So the diaspora strategy, you know, allows us to implement some of the things we're doing in the Caribbean, you know, which has been aided by political enthusiasm from the region, you know, but also to do things with our citizens and diaspora citizens everywhere else. That for us is a concept of a global Africa. So what you must understand, and I think my president always talks about it, that we define intra-Africa. We didn't say intra-Africa trade. We said intra-African trade. It is that N, you know, the emphasis on the N is that allows us to deal with a global Africa, Africans wherever they are on the globe.
All right, and thank you so much for at least putting that into better context for us here. And quite a lot has happened here these past 3 days. We've seen deals that have been signed here. I'd like you to bring us up to speed with some of the important ones and the pipeline in the works, because we need to get the buy-in of the private sector if this dream is going to come to life.
No, we've signed so many deals here. In fact, I think so far, between not counting today, we may have signed about close to $1 billion of deals. But I must step back a little bit. 2 years ago, when we started a foray into the Caribbean, and when we've been expanding our membership of Caribbean countries into the bank, you know. And 1 year ago also, we opened our Barbados. So what we've been trying to do is to, in terms of my definition of intra-African trade, is to promote Afro-Caribbean trade. Remember again that this is our third active Africa-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum. It's just that it's sort of subsumed under the annual general meeting. But this is our third. The first one was in Bridgetown, Barbados. Second was in Georgetown, Guyana, and then now here in the Bahamas. And it's been business development all the way, facilitating an Africa-Caribbean Business Council, supporting the countries and private sector here, such that you'll have heard us talk about deals we've done in climate adaptation in St. Lucia, a sports complex in Barbados, hotel in Silver Springs approved in Grenada. One of the deals I signed yesterday was the Bahamas Development Bank at $30 million. We have also, in terms of what we have also signed in this region, with partners in this region, is the Grand Bahama Marketplace. That's allowed to foster creative industry and creativity as well, such that tourists who come into the Grand Bahama, which is a major port or island for cruises, and who are yearning for ethnic products of Africa, can have access to it. So it's enabling market access for creative industries in Africa. And there are several others we've signed, so far. So for the Grand Bahama facility is a project preparation facility. And aside from what we've signed with the partners here in the Caribbean, there are several others we've also signed with various parties on the African continent as well.
It's a tremendous step for a relatively small indigenous Angolan company. Basically, it's around $400 million. Afreximbank led a syndicate which involves not just them, but also Shell Trading and a couple of Angolan banks, BFA and BAI. But more than the funding is the acquisition of producing assets from Galp, which is the Portuguese energy company. Both of these assets are operated by major oil companies, Total and Chevron. And we, as an Angolan company, 100% owned by Angolans, are going to be part of those producing upstream assets offshore Angola. This, to our company, it means more than doubling our net production, oil production. And in terms of revenue, even net profits, we expect to be twice the size of the company that we are today.
Afreximbank signed a project preparation facility with the Grand Bahama Afro-Caribbean Marketplace to the value of $1.86 million to fund essential pre-development activities that will advance the project to bankability and is expected to unlock further investment estimated at $50 million.
The Afro-Caribbean Marketplace is really twofold. The marketplace itself that will involve the property that was known as the International Bazaar and the Royal Oasis Tower and Casino will be a marketplace that has the 54 to perhaps 55 African countries and 20 Caribbean countries, plus 16 islands of the Bahamas represented with their pavilions. So the pavilions will have the best of what these countries have to offer when it comes to the arts and craft and music and culture. And so it's going to be a gathering place. So it's going to be retail. But the next side of that is the logistics center, which is in the harbor area, where we'll be able to trade our products that are from Africa, products from the Caribbean, and be able to redistribute to the region. So again, it's twofold. It's for the shop space or retail locations themselves, but it's also for the trade of goods, because many may not be aware that Grand Bahama Island is considered the gateway to the Caribbean. And we are about 25 minutes from Miami, but also we have a major transshipment terminal. And that allows us to be able to bring goods into the region for redistribution. We have a transshipment terminal called the Freeport Container Port. We also have MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, that owns about 50% of the container port. So it's the major shipping company that is utilized, and they are spread across the coast of Africa. So when it comes to the trade, you're now shipping direct from Africa to the Bahamas and then onward to Latin America, to the other countries of the Caribbean. So it's, I think, the ideal platform for trade, and we'll be able to provide that opportunity for not just Africa, but the other Caribbean countries. Because one of the things with trade and getting products to market, especially in the Caribbean, is the logistics part of it. And so Grand Bahama, again, also is a free trade zone. So it offers many tax concessions that allow businesses to be able to thrive. So we want to use that model with ensuring that all of our people from Africa and people from the Caribbean, are able to utilize this platform to be able to promote their products and also to be able to distribute.
In the closing conversation, three-time Grammy Award winner Wyclef Jean speaks about the deep connection between Africa and the Caribbean and how that can drive the global Africa agenda.
Going to Haiti. So I say this to tell you the future of the Caribbean is in the hands of Africa. Now let me even go a step deeper with you. I live in a space of physical and metaphysical. So a lot of people say, man, how come a lot of leaders in the Caribbean have not advanced? They used to ask me that when I had my group, the Fujis, short for refugees. I say, until the Caribbean recognizes Africa as a superpower, it can advance. So in saying that, I think that as we move forward, what I look forward in Haiti is the complete narrative, not a narrative of one situation. Don't tell me just about what's going on in the gangs. Tell me about the robotics program where kids are building robots in Jacmel in Haiti. Don't just tell me about the kidnapping. Tell me about the farmers that we need to galvanize, the 30,000 farmers to start to set up trade. When Haiti was known for exporting a big amount of sugar and coffee through the entire Caribbean. So these are some of the narratives that I would like to see.
A lot is hinging on the success of global Africa. There's no doubt that speaking with one voice will give better leverage and strengthen the negotiating position of both regions. I'm Kenneth Igbomo. Thanks for watching.